All right, part two. Sorry, I've gone through all this already. I don't mean to belabor, kind of crapping on our book or whatever. But it does really raise the question, right? With so much stuff one can say about the time period, and so much that's left out, it really raises the question. Well, why do you include the stuff that makes it seem like slavery is not that bad? Why do you include the stuff that makes it seem as though, um, you know, in Native Americans, oh well, they held slaves, so they must have been, maybe they deserved it. It kind of is a question, a very important question. Okay, so speaking of racists, let's talk about the South. Manifest Destiny, 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, 1860s. The South also has a manifest destiny. Their version of westward expansion, it's different than the North's, and sometimes it's not even west, and I'll talk about that. So there's different sections, obviously North and South being the major ones, but they have different views on what expansion means. It's not monolithic. It's not just like, oh, what after the Civil War, it is more so, right? Because that's kind of the idea, is that the nation, if you're white, can kind of heal, and forget about all that racial equality stuff by moving west together. Before the Civil War, that's not the case. The southern version of expansion and the northern version of expansion are obviously very different. South wants slaves, North doesn't. That's the obvious difference. But there's also some geographic things that are important too. And just to kind of put, to remind us to go back to the revolutionary period, remember, the American Revolution was like many revolutions, Chinese in the 1940s, Iranian in the 1970s, you name it. Revolutions are often different factions that maybe don't necessarily get along, but they get along well enough when they don't like that other faction, right? So they want to depose whatever government it is, right? So they work together in order to depose that government. That doesn't mean that they agree on things. And that is the case with the American Revolution. You have people who want to maintain and expand slavery fighting with people who want to abolish slavery. And as we see in the Constitutional Convention and then through this history, that's a tough one to figure out, right? So you kind of have these various factions, and the division just grows and grows and grows as we kind of like the Big Bang theory away from the revolution. As we move further and further away from that moment, the separation, the divisions, ideological divisions, just get stronger and stronger. Okay, so what does that mean? Southerners want, just like anyone else, right? They have their version of the Constitution, right? Their interpretation, and they have the right to property. And they want to move west with their property, but it's not just west. Um, there's this idea that emerges in the antebellum period of the golden circle. So you have it here effectively mapped out on this map here. The golden circle, right? Circle, of course, because you have a circle here, right, in the Gulf of Mexico. The golden circle was seen by many Southerners as that's their version of manifest destiny, right? So it's not just westward expansion, but it's also southern expansion. This is an empire, right, that surrounds the Caribbean. It is a slave based economy, based on high value crops like cotton, and then the even more high value crops like sugar, indigo, and others that you couldn't really grow that well in mainland North America, but you could grow really well in the Caribbean, Central America, Mexico. Um, and I don't know, maybe it'll be in later chapters, maybe not. But there's these various what were called filibusters. Americans going off and trying to conquer, and sometimes successfully. William White was one example of someone who went down and just kind of conquered Nicaragua with a bunch of other people. He's later deposed and executed, but he's a white Southerner who wants to set up a slave-based economy in Nicaragua. So this idea of the golden circle. So that's the Southern manifest destiny. Part of the reason, obviously, is because they are addicted to slavery. They want more and more profit, whatever the human or ethical cost, and also Uh, the land west of the 95th meridian, which I'll show you on a map what it looks like in a second, it's not that great, right? So in the north and in the south, people want to expand west and west, but as we get closer to as we pass the Mississippi and get closer to the Great Plains, it's not that good. At least not in the 1820s. It becomes good for farming later, and I'll talk about why. But in the 1820s, it doesn't look that good, and this is why. So here's an old school 1970s map of, there's Texas and the Santa Fe Trail, and I show you this right. So here we have right. These are canals, Ohio River, Mississippi. Mississippi starts up here, goes all the way down. Missouri River. And then the Santa Fe Trail went from Council Bluffs over this area, which we don't know anything about yet, but I'm going to tell you about in a second, to Santa Fe, New Mexico. And then down the Camino Real goes to Mexico City, and the Camino Real also goes up to California, Southern California. So anyway, this is the Republic of Texas. So as we're talking about, right, here's Missouri, we're pushing west. Right, Missouri? Wait, here's Missouri. Here's Missouri. As we're pushing west, we're getting closer and closer to this unorganized territory. This is very crudely made, but this big blob that I've superimposed over this map is what would have been called the Great American Desert. So this is the grasslands, the plains. There are very few trees. There is not that much wind, and it is just grass. Thousands and thousands of miles of grass. The Spanish pushed that far north and they said, okay, that's it, end of the line. We're not going any further. Similarly, Americans, as they push west, they get to this point and they kind of go like, maybe we just want to go all the way through this and go to California. That's the Oregon Trail, even the Santa Fe Trail, right? You see the Santa Fe Trail, where does it go from? Council Bluffs on one side of the Great American Desert to Santa Fe on the other side, and get through as quickly as possible. And I'll say a few things about this because the geography is relevant to this history here. Here's a map of just a few days ago. These are voting. This is a dot matrix or a disymmetric dot density thematic map if you want to get really geeky about it. It is a map that is effectively, we're all probably shell shocked with the blue and the red state maps and staring at them and refreshing our phones or whatever. This is the same information, but it's mapped out with a dot effectively a dot per voter. And it is not based on county or state, but rather the dot per voter is located at where people live and where people work. Right, so this is effectively like where do those voters who vote blue or red exist in these little pockets, right? Here, blue, blue, red, purpley, right? Blue, blue. So it's actually a far more accurate representation of what it actually looks like. And a lot of people here voting want red team or blue team. So the map makes it look a certain way. It actually isn't that way. And I show you this map because, again, if I put my blob over it, we again see how even with this modern map, you have this kind of sudden, like almost like someone folded the map in half. That's the 95th meridian or the 100th meridian, right? Where basically anything this side, I mean, this is very crudely speaking, but it's effectively, it holds true. This side of the 100th or 95th meridian is wetter, and this side is drier. This was the 95th or 100th meridian, which are different, right? 95th is here, 100th is like a little over here. They're important because it kind of seems like it's the end of the line for settlement, right? So you want to push over and then get all the way to California. So even today, again, we see, right, that it's still, we can still kind of see it on a map. Here's another kind of crude representation that I'm going to, overlay other maps. This is the Rocky Mountains. And this is the Great American Desert. So what is happening here is that effectively the Great Plains, the grasslands, are caused by several factors. There's not a lot of rain because there is a rain shadow effect as wet air, moist air travels this way. It elevates in the Rockies. It dumps the moisture in the form of snow or rain. And then the subsequent air that comes over the other side is very, very dry. So the Great Plains don't get a lot of rain. That's not good if you're a farmer. Um, the Great Plains also, I mean, later on they discover there's a huge aqueduct underneath it, right? That water has been percolating down through thousands of years and it's underneath the ground, and now they're sucking it all out or, pumping, fracking byproducts into it. But that'll be fine. Surely nothing will go wrong there. So this is the Great Plains. This is what it looks like in the time period. Probably the grass would have even been longer. This is this is North Dakota, this image. Pretty foreboding, right? So this is you can see why people thought it was not a very hospitable landscape. These grasses that had grown up over thousands of years had created an enormous kind of like root, right? Like root structure, right? Root, like a packed root structure on the very top, right, of the ground. It was very hard. You'd have to actually literally, people call them sod busters. So people who moved and this will be in a later chapter surely, who moved out here would actually have to take an axe and saw the ground up, and they would use that actually to build houses. It was so dense and thick that they would build their houses out of it. Not a great start if you want to get into agriculture. It's not until we have better steel plows later in the century where people really do start flooding into this area, settling, and turns out, right, that soil, because of thousands of years of dead plant matter, is very, very productive, right? So there's a time period of about 70 years where it's very agriculturally productive. Then all the dirt blows away in the Dust Bowl. More on that later, though. Okay, so anyway, I've been belaboring this point for a long time because this is a major area for Native American life. If you want to really geek out about the grasses here and you want to get like way into the, cottage core, you can check out this Monty Don's Great American Gardens. Monty Don is an English gardener. I'll put the link up, wherever here or however we do it, like this. And if you can want to geek out on some cottage core, you can learn about the grasslands of the Midwest and what they look like. Okay, Great American Desert. Here is in the springtime, right? There's a little bit of undulation, some trees here. This is outside of Kansas City, where they've tried to recreate some of the native grasses. Again, buffalo, Native Americans, not much else. And then as we move closer to the Rockies, this is just east of the Rockies, the kind of foothills. Again, grasses, not a lot of trees. Native Americans live here, though. The Comanche, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and others, they adopt horse culture, and it obviously works really well, right? So the original, if you remember from previous years, original horse culture is the steppes of Asia, a lot like this, right? So they adopt horse culture, helps them with buffalo hunting, which they did previously on foot. You could stalk the buffalo because the grass is so high. You would stalk the buffalo in the tall grasses and then attack. And their kind of pastoralist migratory patterns. You can move faster. You can move more stuff with beasts of burden like horses. Largely, the Native Americans were pushed beyond the 95th meridian. Again, Americans saw this land and they thought, let's just push them out here, get rid of them, send them out to that area. So there's more and more Native communities butting up against each other. This causes a lot of conflict. The book talks about the various forms of conflict, and again, not so great a way. But what it doesn't mention is that a lot of this conflict is because they're pushing other Native groups into areas where people traditionally have lived, right? So they don't want them there. And all of this conflict leads to, it has a very destabilizing effect in Native American communities. Obviously, it's not just Native Americans moving into this land, it's Americans, it's other Europeans. And then ultimately, unfortunately, sadly, that this kind of slow motion genocide leads to, by the end of the century, all Native American groups have been, forced onto reservations. And this GIF illustrates just that. That from effectively the late 1700s to or early 1800s to the late 1800s, in about a 100-year time period, you have the total. I mean, all of the land was native land, all of it. All of it. The land we're on right now is Tongva land, right? If you're in Southern California, north of Aliso Creek. And it's all gone, right? So it's a fairly depressing story, but that is the story of westward expansion, and it's important to think about what is we're learning. We're in APUSH, AP U.S. history, but what does this history look like from a native perspective? If you're, here and you see right the westward expansion coming towards you, what does that history look like? Or if you're a Pequod or a Taino or a Chumash or a Comanche Indian, what does that history look like? Very, very different, and not very good. Let's quickly, I'm not going to do all this Texas stuff. I had a lot of stuff on Texas before because our old book really kind of, for whatever reason, talked about Texas. The main point is that, like, if we look back here at this map, Texas is kind of like uniquely located in a place that's going to cause conflict, right? Westward expansion going this way. The Mexican, once they're independent, are moving this way. Texas is kind of at this pivot point between different forms of expansion. The Mexicans see these kind of Anglos as an asset. They are good people to put between them and the Comanche Indians of the Great American Desert. Comanche Indians are fierce, right, fighters. They are attacking Spanish garrisons. So sure, these Anglos want to move into Texas. The land is cheap, and they want to have grow cotton and have cattle. Sure, put them there. Right, that's a buffer between us, right, the newly independent or the Spanish, and then the newly independent Mexicans, and the Comanches. Doesn't work out for them that way, but that's the idea. Santa Fe Trail, we don't have to go through this stuff, right? So in 1829, Mexico abolishes slavery. That's not a good call, right? If you're an Anglo, you don't like that. General Santa Anna comes to power. He cuts off trade with the Americans. Anglos and then Hispanic Texans don't like it. They rebel. They want to keep all their land. They want to keep all their slaves. They want more power. And then, Alamo, don't forget the Alamo, all this kind of stuff. Blah, 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 blah. Republic of Texas happens. Americans don't want to get involved. Because it's, again, Missouri Compromise was hard enough, but now you have this whole other republic that wants to be admitted to the Union. No one wants to touch it until Polk is elected in 1844, and then he wants to get them in. He says, look, we'll let in Texas, but we'll also let in Oregon, we'll let in California, we'll let in New Mexico. Like, it'll be no problem. One problem, of course, is that Mexico stands in the way of this dream, so you're going to have to go to war with Mexico. The first idea is Polk says we're going to buy California and New Mexico. New Mexico says no. It's not the right answer. The answer was yes. So Polk needs to go to war. How's he going to do it? You can't just start a war. He wants money. He wants to declare war. Congress is hesitant. He sends Zachary Taylor down there to kind of what? Like Zachary Taylor's on the border, what? Like trying to start a fight or hold me back, bro. And eventually something does pop off. American soldiers are killed. There's a debate about where they were. Were they on the Mexican side? Were they on the Texas side? We don't really know. But at that point, war has already been declared, right? So it's like, well, if war's already been declared, I'm going to go to Congress, get the declaration of war. It's going to be easy, and then we're going to have our war. This is the second time that Congress, that the United States officially declares war. It's the second time. First, the the War of 1812. Now, the Mexican-American War. You can guess what the other ones are. It's not the Civil War. World War One, World War Two, and then before that, the Spanish-American War. So only 5 times has actually an official declaration of war been made. 1812, Mexican-American, Spanish-American, World War One, World War Two. But I'm getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's see, we go through quickly. In the background here, people don't want to expand slavery. The Wilmot Proviso, David Wilmot from Massachusetts, puts this kind of addendum on all of these bills. You're not allowed to talk about slavery in Congress, so this is a way around that. Is right, like keep on adding, right, this proviso to all these bills, which says no slavery, no slavery, no slavery. He subverts the gag rule. The gag rule says, right, in order to not get in big conflict, they're just not going to talk about slavery in Congress. The Mexican-American War happens. It doesn't last that long. You can watch, if you want to learn about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and other treaties, you can watch this clip, Jimmy Kimmel. Very good, very funny. I usually show it in class, but we don't have time. But if you like it, just ask to watch it, and we can watch it in class. That basically gives all of what we now know is the Southwest to the United States. Arizona, Nevada, Utah. Kind of great, not great timing here. 1848 is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. 1849 is when they find gold in California. Like, bum, bum, bum. Cue the Larry David music here for the poor Mexican national government. Up to Oregon, and then we're done here. Not super important. Everyone wants it. Spain wants it. Mexico wants it. Russia wants it. Don't really say much about that. Not a very good empire. Not out here, at least. It's like really far away. So Polk wants to annex Oregon. There's this whole thing about 5440 or fight. This is 5440 up here all the way by Alaska. So like basically all of BC or British Columbia, right, would have been, that was the idea. That's the most extreme claim. The other extreme claim is down here, right, the 42nd parallel. They eventually compromise on the 49th. There's a reason for that. If we're going to review here, 1818, the Rush-Bagot Treaty establishes the 49th parallel as the border between the United States and Canada, so that like that smooth line between the United States and Canada, 49th parallel. 1823 Monroe Doctrine says like, hey, Spain, Great Britain, all you Europeans, right? Remember what we said about staying out of the Americas? Well, here we go. It's different for the British. British and the Americans are okay. They get along. So they jointly occupy Oregon. It is founded as explicitly for white only, right? So it kind of like white supremacy to the extreme. So, there you go. The Proud Boys and all those other bootlickers up there still demanding that, Oregon be white only. So they're carrying on a proud tradition. The compromise in the end, back to the 1840s, that the 49th parallel will be the line, with the only exception being Vancouver Island, right? So Vancouver is below the 49th parallel, so that's part of Canada. Here's the kind of map to review, the expansion map here, the original colonies, Northwest Ordinance here, Spanish Cession, Louisiana Purchase. This is the Rush-Bagot here, right, which establishes this line there. Mexican, or ceded by Mexico after Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The Gadsden Purchase. If you watched or would like to watch that Jimmy Fallon clip, you'll learn about the Gadsden Purchase. And then here's Oregon and that up there. That's it. That's it for westward expansion. That's a whole territory that is the United States. Hawaii comes later. Alaska comes later. Cuba comes later. Guam, Puerto Rico, etc., etc. But for now, this is it. And that's it for me.